Hi, Marty.
Okay, so I've already started the recording. Now we left off kind of in the middle of cash register, if I remember right, didn't we? We were talking about adding items, how we can do. Remember self? Remember always have to include self on everything we do. Remember that? Nothing new there. I know we already walked through this one. Calling one method from another. This is actually a really good example. You'll be doing it in your next program. If you have a method, you can actually call another method. Just make sure you include the self dot whatever the method name is. Pretty simple stuff there. Okay. So there's our example of cash register. Reference these when you're working on your assignment because they show you exactly what a constructor should look like. They show you what methods should look like. They show you what classes should look like. So, I mean, there you go. You have your constructor already written. Obviously, instead of item count and total price, what are you going to have in there for names? Maybe like current and base.
Yeah.
Just like I tell you, make sure you do the double underscore on those. That way they're private. Talked about that last time. But keep an eye on those here. It says, there's a couple, this is actually a really good program. There's an instance variable should only be defined in the constructor. Now we're going to talk about two different kinds of variables. There's instance variables and class variables. Instance variables pertain to the instance, okay? Just like last time we made I think it was a concert tally and a bus tally. Or remember we had those two different tally machines, okay? So the instance, in this case, is going to be number one. But all your variables are normally instance variables unless defined differently as class variables, which we're going to see an example of in a minute. It says, all variables, including instance variables, are created at runtime, which means when you run the program, they're created, they're instantiated, and then you can use them. There's nothing to prevent you from creating them in other places. You can. Just normally create them inside your constructor. Okay? So the correct constructor is invoked before any method has been called. So that's why they get initialized in the constructor. Pretty easy stuff there. Now, class variables, also called static variables. If you've done any Java program, you declare them static, which makes them a class variable. Those pertain to all instances of it. Okay? Just like we said on this prior slide, instance variables pertain to the instance. For instance, if I had a student class, I could have a different instance for each of you, okay? But I could have a class variable that pertain to everybody, okay? Class variables, as they were called, static. They have value property belongs to the entire class, not the individual instance, and you declare them the same level as the methods. So you don't declare it inside your constructor or inside of a method. You declare it at the same level. So you know how we say define whatever? You declare a variable right there at the same level as define. That means it would pertain to the entire class, and we're going to see an example of it here in just a second. Okay. Okay. In this example, the bank account, they have self.balance. You see that? It's equal to 0. That is the instance variable that's keeping track of a bank balance. Okay. Now I also have last number assigned. You notice how that's lined up with the definition of the methods? That's a class variable. For instance, if we all had bank accounts, if we all walked over and made a bank account today, every instance would want a different balance. Okay? But last assigned number would pertain to everybody. Maybe, like a student right before class went over and paid for a COPTIA voucher. They paid for 2 different vouchers. They got 2 different receipts. The receipts were numbered one after another. Okay, makes sense. That's why every time they print a new receipt, it keeps your income in the number. Every time you create. Now, if we walked over to the First National Bank today and I opened a bank account, and somebody walked in directly behind me and opened a bank account, what do you think? Would her number be the same as mine? No, it will most likely be the next number. Like mine is 2028261. Hers will be 2028262. Okay. Does anyone else here remember all your bank account numbers?
Yep.
And routing number is 1030128433.
I feel like you should not be saying that out loud because you got that
on camera, so.
You can't do nothing with it because it's a protective area. But you should remember all that stuff.
Until I convert it to hexadecimal.
There you go. But so you understand the difference between instance and class. Everybody see that? It's very important. Now, what you're doing today, you're only going to use instance variables. But sometimes you need class variables. We're just not making you do it yet. Okay? Okay. So every bank account object has its own balance. Okay? And account number is assigned to each instance, but the last account number is assigned to the entire class. Okay. So the variable is stored in a separate location outside of the bank account object. Easy enough there. Like instance variables, class variables should always be private to ensure that methods of other classes cannot change them. And we know to create a private, just use 2 underscores. Okay. All right. How about an overdraft fee? Do you think that would be good to have it as a class variable or an instance variable?
Instance. Well, no, it would be class.
Probably class.
Because you don't want a different fee for every different person.
But there could be.
Yeah, like
There
it,
could be.
depending on.
Okay, let's go with interest rate, for instance.
Yeah, but you'd have a base rate and then you would.
Right.
Okay.
A base rate that pertains to everybody. But then we should have the ability to change it.
So extending it.
Right, except yes. Like a prime example is, anyone have a Discover card? A couple of you. I've had a Discover card since like 1986. And I actually was going to get rid of it because I was not using it. So I called them and I was going to cancel it. The guy's like, why cancel it? Just keep it there. I said, yeah, but I never use it. He goes, yeah, but just in case you ever need it. And he looked back and he's like, look, for the last 15 years, I've never paid any interest. And my interest rate, I think, was 18%. So I was like, yeah, but I don't really need my Discover card. And he's like, well, you have used it in the past, but whenever you do use it, you always pay it off. I said, yeah, because I hate paying interest. So the guy's like, well, how about if I set your interest rate to 0? I'm like, what? He goes, I'll set your interest rate to 0. You never pay interest anyway, so I'll set it to 0. I'm like, okay. So wait, my Discover card has an interest rate of 0.
Got it.
If you want to cancel, I'll say your interest is 0.
But I don't ever use it. I mean, it's, got too many darn credit cards. But that would be something that we would probably have a base rate, but it could change based on individuals. Okay.
That's crazy. I've never heard that.
All right. Does anyone use Smarty Pig? Don't know what Smarty Pig is?
No, not at all.
Smarty Pig is an excellent website, by the way. Let me tell you what I use Smarty Pig for. I have to pay property taxes once a year. I have to pay insurance once a year, all this stuff. You want Smarty Pig, like my property taxes, I got the darn bill yesterday, $4,000 basically. Okay. So what I do is I go into Smarty Pig and I make a goal of $4,000 due December 15th. And then it automatically transfers money from my checking account every month to make sure I have $4,000 by December 15th. And I get 1.75% interest. Not 0.0, I mean, actual true 1.75. So I literally looked at it last night because I got my tax bill in the mail yesterday. So I looked, and sure enough, I'll have the money I need by next month. I made like $11 interest this month alone because I've saved basically $4,000. But it's cool. Every time I have a bill that's due yearly, I go in there and make a new Smarty Pig goal. And I say, like, I'm going on a cruise March 2020. So by that January, I have to pay for the cruise. So I set a goal of $2,000 due January 2020. And it's automatically taking so much a month out of my checking account to make sure I meet that goal by January, and I get interest on it. That way, when time comes to pay for the cruise, I already got all the money, I just pay. So it's free, by the way, to sign up. I'm doing on 3 cruises.
And they do a 2% interest rate.
1.75%. Which
I'll
I'll tell you, that is phenomenal interest.
Yeah, that's
So you're going by yourself to just do that?
No, actually, that cruise is with my wife.
The savings interest rate that I had was 0.5. It was
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah, see, I use First National Bank over here, and right now my interest rate there is like 2.13, which is amazing as well. But I can only have $10,000 in my account. See, Smarty Pig, I can have a lot more.
Yeah, that's not a problem for other people.
Well,
I do understand.
yeah. But I mean, I literally talked Roy into doing it because Roy, How many of you store up? I mean, if you had a $4,000 tax bill, what would you do? You'd freak out when it was due.
I would cry, but.
But if you literally saved every month, then when the $4,000 tax bill came due, I avoid doing that. He did it for his property tax, even though his property tax was only $800. But still, 800 divided by 12 months is a small amount of change. And then when the taxes are due, you just transfer the 800 back in your check account and you're all paid. So look into it. It's pretty good place. I like it. Okay, so now we know the difference between class variables and instance variables. Testing is kind of important. I'm not going to walk through all this stuff here, but what they're talking about here is you can test it at the command or at the shell window. Okay, you can also make test programs, which they talk about right here, where they run it and they say, okay, what's the value? But it should be this. Okay, so it's printing out the current total. They expected it to be this. So you write a test program that actually calls the methods and does the math, and so it outputs the result, but also puts out the expected result, and they should match. You could actually even make the test go even farther where it compares them, and then actually says, hey, there was an anomaly between this or whatever. But testing is very important, and I tell you, testing probably, I mean, there's an opening in Tinker right now for a tester, quality control tester, because it's really needed. It's such a big deal. It doesn't pay a lot. It only pays like 30 something. But hey, it's kind of important to have.
So this is kind of a non sequitur, but how is garbage
Zero, so 13.
As far as I know, it's handled exactly like in Java.
Okay.
That when the shell closes, it clears it. Because I actually did some checking on that. And remember, even when we talked about not closing files correctly,
Yes.
when the shell closes, it does clear.
If we're starting to create classes and add methods, it's going to start sucking.
Yeah.
I mean, and
A
it
lot.
doesn't matter on this computer, but on a Pi or.
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Yes, it will. But when it closes, but what if it doesn't close? You know, like when I had that monitor on my wall downstairs, that thing ran 24/7. So yes, garbage collection, when the shell closes, it clears. Okay. All right. So they talk about testing, all the different ways of testing. I'm not going to walk through. You please just read this stuff on your own. Okay. I'm not going to walk through all of them, but they do talk about things here like how to create a constructor. We're going to do that here in a minute. Now, they talk about accessors and mutators. Those two words are kind of weird to some people. A mutator method, what does mutate mean? Change. So a mutator method changes something. So deposit could be a mutator method because you're changing a balance. You're depositing money, or you're withdrawing money, or you're adding interest. All those are mutators because they're affecting a balance. Accessors return something. Okay, it's not going to change anything. So accessors and mutators, for every item, you should have one of those. For instance, if you have an account balance, you should have a way to increase the balance, decrease the balance, or get the balance. So you should have an accessor and mutator for each variable. You never want to access the variables individually. Okay. All right. So they talk about different variables, and again, I'm not going to walk through all these. Okay, they just have a huge example in here, more of the cash register. If you get lost, look through their darn example, right? I think that's covered most of it in here. They talk about copying. They talk about none. It says a reference may point to no object. It says you cannot convert it via the none reference. None basically doesn't exist. Okay, you can also test if it equals none. So it's kind of like the whole null value, zero value. Those are actually very hard to play with sometimes. We already know what self is. We talked about self. That's the instance itself. Okay.
Can you hold a spot with a null value though?
Yes, you can. It's more like creating a variable. It just hasn't given it a value yet.
So it allocates it in the memory space?
Yes.
Okay.
Just hasn't put, yes. That's exactly what it does.
So it doesn't give it a type if you make a variable.
No, it doesn't.
It just makes
See,
it
and see, that's what's, Python's kind of weird. Python's kind of like Visual Basic in that instance. You really can't tell it, hey, this is a string or this is an integer. it really determines that once you start using it. Visual Basic was the same way, but Visual Basic really used what's called varchar. It created a variable as varchar, which was like the largest data type available. It's kind of like, let's just make everything huge. And then, until you actually defined it as something else. It was kind of weird. Okay. All right, I'm going to start working on our program a little bit. Okay. They walked through a fraction class, and I was originally going to have you guys do this, but consider it's in the slides, that's kind of cheating. And plus, I've already signed it before, so you would have found it online. So I kind of would have given that away.
I think you think we look really deep. For some of
I
this stuff.
know.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Have us,
I'm sure you do. Yeah, I'm sure you do. What was it William said last time? I can't search you for a Python class to read in a preposition list. There's no such thing. I mean, I just came up with that. It's
I
not,
was on Google. I was on YouTube like crazy, just trying to somebody teach me how to do this.
all right. Yeah, and they talked about different fractions. Again, I assigned this one in the past. It's not all that difficult, but I just don't want to walk through it here. Plus, you give the whole darn program. All right. So I'm going to stop this recording, and then we're going to work on our assignment. Okay.
That's point on the article.